In 1993, Swedish-born Jana Novotná exploded onto the tennis scene and appeared ready to achieve the glory of Wimbledon. With her powerful play and wonderful style, Novotná was on the rise majorly, both in the public eye and in professional tennis. In the fourth final game against Steffi Graf, she was leading the game 40 points to Graf's 30. All it would take was a couple more shots and Novotná would be hoisting the ever-so-elusive trophy over her head. Instead, nearing the final moments of gameplay, she cracked, double faulted, and lost all her momentum. Suddenly, Novotná was making rookie mistakes over and over again. Mistakes that Graf happily capitalized on to help her win the next 4 games against Novotná, claiming the title as champion. The world watched in jaw-dropping silence at the sight of Novotná breaking into tears at her loss, a sight many news tabloids would describe as heartbreaking to watch. 5 years later, Novotná would end up winning the tournament. However, sadly, she is still remembered more for her spectacular choke than her more recent victories. A team with the reputation as baseball's biggest losers in big games not only beat the prestigious New York Yankees, they did it with a 3-game advantage. In 2004, the Boston Red Sox made a huge comeback against the Yankees, but not because they played any better. No, it was because the Yankees dropped the ball, pun intended. No baseball team had ever been down 3-0 in the playoffs and come back to win. For context, the Yankees had scored 32 total runs for the first 3 games against the Red Sox. They scored 19 runs in the 3rd game. The Red Sox were down on their luck. As Game 4 of the American League Championship began, it looked like the Yankees were going to pull off the sweep. When in the bottom of the 9th inning, the Sox would have to score against one of the greatest closers in baseball history if they wanted a chance at turning the game around. So they did just that. Yankees pitcher Mariano Rivera uncharacteristically hit leadoff batter Kevin Miller with the ball, allowing him to walk to base. Rivera's accidental hit against Miller would ultimately prove to be the beginning of the downfall of the Yankees that season. With Miller being too injured from the hit, Dave Roberts took base for him instead, and on a key play stole second base. The next batter up, Bill Mueller, hit a single, allowing Roberts to run home, tying up the game. Later on in the bottom of the 12th inning, Red Sox David Ortiz hit not 1 but a 2-run home run, winning the game for the Boston Red Sox. After that devastating blow to the Yankees' near-perfect season, they were never able to recover, albeit not for a lack of trying. The Red Sox won again in an incredibly long Game 5. Suddenly, Yankees fans were becoming worried, and rightfully so. It seemed they'd lost all their mojo. However, many fans still had hope that they would overcome this hiccup. Then came Game 6, a game that went down in baseball history due to Red Sox pitcher Curt Schilling throwing the game of his life. Even though Schilling was injured and couldn't finish the game, Boston won, and the anger of the Yankees fans was so huge that riot police were stationed to make sure it didn't get out of hand. Both sides eagerly awaited the final game, which was expected to be a tight affair. Instead, Boston squashed New York 10-3 in Yankee Stadium to get to the World Series, finally ending the Red Sox' 83-year-long losing streak. 2004 marks the year New York lost the championship title to a team that hadn't won in nearly a century. For a few glorious moments, it looked like the Portland Trail Blazers were about to pull off the comeback of the century. Losing 3 games against the Los Angeles Lakers and only winning 1, most Portland fans had come to accept that the Trail Blazers were likely not going to see the 2000 NBA Western Conference Championship Finals. Then, surprising everyone, Portland turned it around and won Games 5 and 6. With the 2 teams tied and with hope restored in every Portland fan's heart, Game 7 had become a meaningful one for each team, leaving even the most skeptical of watchers convinced Portland's 7th game would play out in a similar fashion. Portland started the game a force to be reckoned with, clearly in control of the game, dominating the Lakers with a 71-55 lead. With only 10 minutes left in the game, the Trailblazers and all of their fans were confident they'd be advancing to the finals. At which point, after playing 2 3/4 near-perfect games, the Trailblazers' performance fell apart. They missed easy layups and passes as the Lakers, seeing this downfall, finally got their head into the game. Both Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal came alive. Together, the two ran a masterful play, beating out the final buzzer with a shot that sealed the deal for the Lakers to win 89-84. Los Angeles would then go on to win the first of 3 straight NBA championships. Next to passing up a chance to have Michael Jordan on their team, this remains the biggest blunder in the Portland Trail Blazers history. What does it take to become the most hated man in Chicago? Well, causing your home team to lose a game would be one of them, especially when you're just an audience member, which is exactly what Steve Bartman did in the 2003 National League Championship Series when the Chicago Cubs were up against the Florida Marlins. Leading the Florida Marlins 3-0 in the 8th inning, the Cubs were just 5 outs away from going to the World Series, a feat they haven't accomplished since 1945. That was until the Marlins' Luis Castillo stepped up to plate and hit a foul ball to the stands. Cubs outfielder Moises Alou raced to prepare for what should have been an easy catch. Instead, in his moment of infamy, Bartman reached out over the railing and grabbed the ball first, stealing it from the outfield. As if seeing it as an easy excuse, the Cubs began to come apart. Castillo was walking, followed by a wild pitch, and suddenly the Marlins were on fire. Time and time again, the Cubs missed easy plays, made bad calls, and repeatedly made mistakes that worked in favor of the Marlins. By the time the inning was finally done, Florida had scored 8 runs to pull ahead. The Cubs were not able to recover and ultimately lost the game, continuing their long streak of missing out on the World Series. During the downfall, fans began blaming Bartman for the change of fate, blind to the fact that he wasn't actually on the field for all of this. Eventually, the crowd grew into a fury, and security had to escort him off the premises for his own safety. And it all started with Bartman trying to snag himself a lucky fly ball. In Game 6 of the World Series, the St. Louis Cardinals were up against the Kansas City Royals. The Cardinals, however, could already taste the champagne. They had already taken a 3-1 lead over the Kansas City Royals, giving themselves a major advantage. Despite batting a pitiful team average of 185 and only 13 runs total, St. Louis was still on top. Going into the bottom of the 9th inning, the St. Louis Cardinals, who hadn't blown a 9th inning lead all season, were up 1-0 and set for victory. The Royals' George Orta, while up to bat, hit the ball directly into the ground, otherwise known as a grounder. That would have made for an easy out, yet in one of the biggest blown calls of all time, umpire Don Denkinger decided to make the call that Orta was safe, despite the fact that he was clearly standing a step away from the plate at the end of the play. Despite desperate howls and pleas from the Cardinals, the umpire stood by his call. St. Louis still had plenty of time to overcome the call, but with the pressure on, the team instead imploded. The call allowed Orta to walk-load the bases. All the Royals needed was a single hit and they won the game. The Cardinals gave it their all in Game 7 to recover their title back, but ultimately were outmatched and once again lost to the Kansas City Royals, losing 11-0. St. Louis put the blame square on umpire Denkinger's shoulders, but in the end, the Cardinals were the real reason their supposed surefire championship instead turned into a 21-year title drought. Golfing rookie sensation Jean Van de Velde looked like a future champion in the making while at the 1999 British Open. He was on his way to scoring the biggest upset imaginable by beating the more experienced field. He was up by a dominant lead, playing an air-free game over the tournament, and kept on top as he played the final course. He had a 3-stroke lead as he headed to the 18th hole. A victory so certain they had actually begun prematurely engraving his name into the claret jug, at which point de Velde began playing a round so atrocious that he would have been a laughingstock on even a miniature golf course. Starting off with the driver, he sent the ball against the grandstand and straight into the rough. In his poor attempt to recover, he sent the ball straight from the rough patch right into the thick patch near a pond. So de Velde took off his shoes and socks, walked into the pond, and tried to make the shot. He instead took a 4th stroke, then hit a 5th shot against the bunker. By the time he finally got the ball out of the thick grass and into the hole, his score had amounted to a triple bogey, and just like that, his easy lead vanished. This led to a playoff that ended with de Velde's name scratched off the cup, and his competitor Paul Lawrie's name being engraved onto it instead. To this day, de Velde's career never recovered. To showcase just how historic of a choke this was, his biggest claim to fame is that any collapse in golf is referred to as pulling a de Velde. If you're a Buffalo Bills fan, it's known as the comeback. But if you're a Houston Oilers fan, it's known as the biggest collapse ever witnessed in pro football. The Bills were squared up to win their 3rd straight Super Bowl spot as the Oilers visited. Houston was winning by a landslide, scoring 21 points in the 2nd quarter and then another touchdown in the 3rd quarter, giving them a 35-3 advantage with only a quarter and a half left to play. However, unfortunately for the Oilers, just as they were ready to celebrate their win, the Bills suddenly began coming back. The Bills scored a touchdown and then recovered their own onside kick to score again. The tactics the Oilers' offense used to keep the Bills' advances at bay during the first half were suddenly ineffective during the second half of the game, as at the end of the 3rd quarter the score was only 35-31, and hope was returned to the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo took the lead in the 4th quarter 38-35, but Houston managed to kick a field goal to tie it up and give the Oilers one last final shot at victory. All they needed to do was win a coin flip. Winning the coin toss should have given the Oilers that chance in overtime, but they fumbled that opportunity when an interception combined with a face-masking penalty allowed the Bills to hit a field goal in a stunning 41-38 victory. The Bills would go on to the Super Bowl flush off this win. Just 3 years later, the Oilers would move to Nashville to become renamed as the Titans. Many would claim that this game was the final straw that broke the camel's back. The Detroit Red Wings have seen slews of success over the years as one of the original 6 of the NHL League. They've won 11 Stanley Cups over the years and have had some of the best records in the league, a feat no other team in National Hockey League history has ever accomplished. But they also hold the trophy for the greatest choke in the NHL. In the 1942 Cup Finals, the Red Wings were dominating the Toronto Maple Leafs, winning the first 3 games, and they were expected to close out the 4th victory in Detroit. Instead, during said game, a referee made a controversial call that was angrily disputed by the Red Wings' hot-headed coach Jack Adams. After a long argument, Adams sucker-punched the ref in the face. The resulting call caused Detroit to suffer their first loss. Fan outrage was so extreme, a small riot started in the city. Combining the embarrassing events of the riot, the Jack Adams outburst, and their fresh loss, the city of Detroit and their hockey team were absolutely mortified. The events left Detroit resting on a low point. Riding this momentum, Toronto crushed Detroit in Game 5, and then again shut them out in the following 2 games. In Game 8, it looked like the Red Wings had gotten their momentum back when in the first half they pulled ahead. But then in the second half, Toronto once again took over to outshoot Detroit over 2-1 and finally won in front of an overjoyed home crowd. No other hockey team has blown a 3-0 lead in the finals, and despite all their success since, Detroit has to feel red about that year. In 1964, with only 12 games left to play, the Philadelphia Phillies had fought hard for a 6.5-game lead, and most believed the season was over. The Phillies were so confident they were heading for the World Series that their front office had already printed up World Series tickets, and the city had even planned a parade route. That said, there was no reason to doubt them. This was a team who had dominated every opponent since opening day. Led by the sharp Gene Mach, there was no way they could throw this victory streak. So when they lost one measly game, no one was too concerned. But then they lost another, and another, and another. At the worst possible time, Philadelphia lost 10 straight games, rocketing the team's successful season right onto shaky grounds. The entire team inexplicably seemed to be coming apart at once. Mach received heavy criticism for forcing pitchers with only a day of rest to return to the mound. But despite his poor choices, it still didn't explain the players' constant fielding errors and lack of hitting the ball when batting. Finally, in a homestand, the Phillies lost to the St. Louis Cardinals, sacrificing their chance at a World Series championship. Heartbroken Phillies fans then had to watch as the Cardinals won the World Series over the Yankees. Over 50 years later, the series, now dubbed the Philly Fold, still remains a sore spot among Philadelphia Phillies fans. Greg Norman made it no secret he wanted to win the Golf Masters tournament, a prize that had long eluded him. Norman was considered one of the best around, a man feared for his great skill on the course. After years of competing, the year of 1996 seemed to be the year he was finally going to achieve his dream. Successfully leading through the first 3 days of play, Norman's score was nearing the course record with an impressive score of 63 strokes. Up by 6 strokes going into the 4th and final day, it looked to everyone like Norman was going to finally get his chance to slip on that famed green jacket. But on that 4th day, even after having a good start, the pressure got to Norman and he began to choke. On the 3rd hole, he ended up getting a birdie. Then he birdied on the next hole as well, and on all the final 7 holes. He double bogeyed off the water and shot over par on 5 holes, and one shot from a tee went directly in the water. With Norman in decline, competitor Nick Faldo was able to take over the lead and win the tournament. Unknown at the time, that would prove to be Norman's final chance at the Masters tournament. Afterward, his career declined due to both injuries and his implosion, which is sadly what he is better known for rather than his many previous great victories.